Hey there, everyone. Welcome to the Bird's Nest Podcast. I'm Joe Donahue. Thank you so much for joining us. It is that time of year when we start to see opportunities for teams to clinch the playoffs. We had two teams in the NFL clinch this past week. The Buffalo Bills clinched the AFC East, and the Kansas City Chiefs clinched a playoff spot. And there are more opportunities this week for other teams. This week is also when the Philadelphia Eagles start to get into the mix. The Philadelphia Eagles, for the first time this season, will have an opportunity to clinch a playoff spot during Week 14, depending on the outcome of their matchup with the Carolina Panthers, as well as some other opportunities that would be going on throughout the rest of the league. So what we're going to do today is we're going to take a look at those scenarios that were released by the NFL this morning as the Eagles look towards their appearance in January and maybe, hopefully, February. Now, I do just want to make a quick note and say that the Eagles can clinch a playoff spot this week, but they can't clinch anything else yet. There's still division rivals that are a little too close to them in the standings right now. It's looking very likely that the Philadelphia Eagles will wind up winning the NFC East, but at this stage in the game, the Commanders are the Eagles' closest rival in terms of record, and should something like last season happen, God forbid, the Commanders have an opportunity to leapfrog the Eagles there. Now, all of these scenarios are contingent upon the Eagles defeating or tying the Carolina Panthers. A tie is incredibly unlikely in this scenario, and even if it was more likely, it's still an embarrassing kind of situation. The Carolina Panthers are definitely not a team to overlook because they have been playing very close games over the course of these last several weeks, but it would be relatively embarrassing given the way that the Eagles have been playing up till this point since the bye. If the Eagles defeat the Carolina Panthers, the next thing that has to happen is they need a loss or a tie from one of the NFC South opponents to whom they lost. That is the Atlanta Falcons or the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. If one of those two teams loses, then the Eagles need additional help from elsewhere in the league, notably Arizona, which I think is going to be the biggest wild card here. If Arizona ties with Seattle and either Atlanta or Tampa Bay loses and the Eagles win, the Philadelphia Eagles are in the playoffs. If Arizona loses to Seattle, not ties, but loses to Seattle, the Eagles will need help from one of these two teams, the Los Angeles Rams or the Detroit Lions. The Detroit Lions play the Green Bay Packers on Thursday Night Football, and Eagles fans should absolutely be rooting for the Green Bay Packers at this point. There is no scenario right now where Philadelphia Eagles fans should be rooting for the Detroit Lions. Why? The Detroit Lions are currently 11-1. They have the number one seed in the NFC right now. The Eagles right now are 10-2, and they are one seed behind the Detroit Lions. The Eagles could, in theory, get that number one seed if the Detroit Lions lose to the Green Bay Packers on Thursday Night Football. So any scenario that involves Detroit winning or tying in the Green Bay Packers matchup should not be a scenario that Philadelphia Eagles fans are rooting for. So let's take a look then at the other matchup that's involved, the Buffalo Bills versus the LA Rams. Now, just 2 weeks ago, the Philadelphia Eagles defeated, soundly I would point out, the LA Rams. And the LA Rams are going up against a team that is relatively similarly caliber in terms of the Buffalo Bills. The Buffalo Bills, just last week, absolutely trounced the San Francisco 49ers. So if I'm looking at this game and I'm trying to pick a winner, I am absolutely picking the Buffalo Bills in this game. So I do think that the LA Rams will probably be the more likely of the two to occur. Plus, it's the one that Eagles fans want anyway because we want Detroit to lose. But again, all of that is contingent upon the outcome of the Seattle Seahawks versus the Arizona Cardinals game. The Seattle Seahawks right now, record-wise, 7-5. The Cardinals 6-6. Both of them still very much in the mix for the NFC West title because the San Francisco 49ers, simply put, have not lived up to their post-Super Bowl expectations. The Seahawks and the Cardinals are in number 1 and 2, respectively, for the division right now. So this is an important matchup for the both of them to win. Now, just 2 weeks ago, the Seattle Seahawks and the Arizona Cardinals faced off in Seattle, and the Seahawks defeated the Cardinals 16-6. So Seattle is hoping for the head-to-head tiebreaker here. Seattle doesn't want to split the series, so they're going to have a little bit more of an edge there. The Arizona Cardinals, meanwhile, want to get that series split. So it's going to be an interesting challenge for the both of these two teams. As I'm looking at this game, I do think that the Seattle Seahawks will come out on top, but just narrowly on top. Now, of our two NFC South opponents that we lost to, that we need the help from, the Atlanta Falcons are taking on the Minnesota Vikings. Meanwhile, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers are taking on the Las Vegas Raiders. Given the way that the Las Vegas Raiders and Kansas City Chiefs Black Friday matchup ended, I'm not entirely sure that there's not going to be a fire lit underneath the Raiders, but I don't think that they're good enough to surmount the Tampa Bay Buccaneers at this point. Meanwhile, the 6-6 Atlanta Falcons, with a Kirk Cousins that really has not been performing all that well, are going up against a 10-2 Minnesota Vikings team that really wants that number 1 spot in the NFC North. So, as I'm looking at this game, I think that Atlanta is much more likely to lose to the Minnesota Vikings than the Tampa Bay Buccaneers are to lose to the Raiders. Now, I want to spend a quick moment on what happens if the Philadelphia Eagles tie the Carolina Panthers. If that happens, then 2 changes to the general structure of these scenarios need to occur. First, the Falcons or the Buccaneers have to lose to their opponents. They can't tie their opponents anymore. Additionally, the Thursday night matchup between the Detroit Lions and the Green Bay Packers does not matter at all for whether or not the Eagles clinch a playoff spot. It does matter if the Eagles want to try to climb to that number 1 seed, but it does not matter for whether or not the Eagles clinch a playoff spot this week. So that's your general breakdown. Again, the scenario that I think Eagles fans should be rooting for right now are the Eagles defeating the Carolina Panthers, the Atlanta Falcons losing to the Minnesota Vikings, the Arizona Cardinals losing to Seattle, and So that's the general breakdown. Again, I think So that's the general breakdown of all the scenarios. Again, the scenario that I think is the most likely, and certainly the scenario that I think that Eagles fans should be rooting for, is for the Philadelphia Eagles to win, the Atlanta Falcons to lose, the Arizona Cardinals to lose, and the Los Angeles Rams to lose. So again, that's the general breakdown, but this is what I think that the Philadelphia Eagles fans should be rooting for, and this is the scenario that I think is the most likely. The Philadelphia Eagles defeat the Carolina Panthers, the Atlanta Falcons lose to the Minnesota Vikings, the Arizona Cardinals lose to the Seattle Seahawks, and the Los Angeles Rams lose to the Buffalo Bills. If all of those things happen, then the Philadelphia Eagles will be in the playoffs and have a really solid shot at getting the number 1 seed in the NFC. But let me know what you think in the comments below. Which of these scenarios do you think is the most likely to play out? Let me know. And thank you so much to everybody for tuning into the Bird's Nest Podcast. You can support the Bird's Nest Podcast by liking and subscribing to Bird's Nest Media right here on YouTube, as well as by sharing to your social media pages. You can also find us on SoundCloud, iTunes, Amazon Podcasts, Spotify, and the Odyssey app. Please visit birdsnestmedia.com for additional Eagles and NFL coverage. And if you feel so inclined to support us in a different way, you can find the link to our Patreon in the description below or at birdsnestmedia.com. Thank you so much for tuning in, and let's go Eagles!